Welcome to another, hopefully very relaxing and cozy art video. I'd been working on this series of gouache illustrations in my sketchbook to create an art scene inspired by my summer travels. So after a very colorful, bright spread, we'll tackle a moodier, darker palette today that somehow still matches these summer memories. Today's sketches are all about a visit to a Korean temple in a small grotto up in the cliffs of Sanbangsan on Jeju Island. This being a cave-like temple is one reason to reach for this gouache palette with its darker colors. My inspiration isn't just the temple itself, but all those early summer days which were so hot and humid that fog constantly rose from the ocean to then travel inland, hovering around volcanic mountains and enveloping Jeju's landscapes. Even while walking up the endless stairs to the Sanbanggulsa, the Sanbang Grotto temple, the landscape behind us disappeared into fog, until all that was left was the cave in front of us, with just grey clouds behind, above, and below. I'm using the Holbein Irodori gouache winter palette, which has this really interesting contrast of moody, muted dark hues and very chromatic pinks and blues. Overall, I'm approaching this spread in my sketchbook with a more conceptual focus. The previous pages were for me to find ways to use these gouache paints, finding a painting style and experimenting with color mixes and brushes, never really knowing what the end of the sketch would bring. Now I'm more sure of what I want and especially what I need for this art scene of sketches to feel complete. Towards the end of this video, I'll also share everything I personally do to make an art scene, how to fold them, how to lay out for them, and how I made mock-ups and bonus illustrations. One interesting part of this travel sketchbook page, as it's forbidden to bring cameras up close into the actual grotto, I was really focused on getting a lot of sketching done on location. While I had limited time, I quickly blocked in the back of the grotto with the large stone statue of the Buddha as well as several smaller ones, and many candles illuminating it. And then continued on with a sketch of the colorful lanterns to the right of the grotto. I really enjoy sketching on location as it takes my focus away from precision or correct perspective, which I can become trapped in when working from photos. And it's overall more about capturing a mood, an impression of the scene. So that mood, a dark cave, smooth stone, bright flickering candles, vibrant pink flowers, and lanterns in different shades of red and yellow and green, all on a hot yet misty morning. That's where this palette comes in. It's surprisingly warm tone for a winter-themed palette, and so I wanted to see if I could capture this combination of fog, humidity, heat, and lots of grey without it just looking boring. We'll see how that goes. So a quick check-in as I have to go and clean my water and palette and before I have to put away my sketchbook for this morning. I've been obsessed with this winter palette, as you by now probably have seen, and I think this underpainting or like this first color layer here shows why I love this one so much, because you can get a lot of these subtle warm to cool gradients without it ever becoming incohesive. I find it really easy to control. It's similar to what I use in acrylic paintings a lot for my first color layer with ultramarine blues and burnt umbers and raw umbers and burnt sienna. in a way, we've got something very similar going here, so I'm just feeling very at home with this color palette. But I think if you personally have struggled with warm to cool gradients or making a sketch look cohesive, then this might be a great starting point, because despite what it looks like, you can actually mix a lot of really beautiful shades with these. There's a lot of complementary colors to mix to create unique gray tones, but you still have some really bright reds, bright pinks, even something that looks a bit like a phthalo blue. I'm not so sure about what to do in the left corner here, because that's where the water fountain, like the spring water of this mountain grotto shrine was, and it's not very like visually appealing. So I think I might actually just add another tiny sketch of the same temple, but maybe seen from a different angle, or maybe the temple at the foot of Sanbangsan with a similar statue would make for a nice contrast here. So I don't know yet about this bottom left corner. So far what I've loved about this sketchbook is having the possibility, the ability to treat each page as a composition where I can put different elements. So that challenges me to go beyond my usual just single view sketches. I'll go feed my cat and do some laundry and then see if I have time for some more painting. He really likes this little microphone contraption that I've created with my brush. He doesn't attack it, but whenever I start recording voiceover like this, he just wanders over, stares at it, and then sits down on my sketchbooks. So I think he just wants attention. During this early painting stage here, I was looking for solutions to the candlelight, painted with this palette. And it quickly became all about chroma contrast, placing very saturated but transparent layers of iron red oxide next to much more opaque, grey, greenish hues for the candles. I'm using a slightly larger brush by now, finally, which I rushed to the local art store for in between all these sketchbook sessions. And I might have to get one even larger for the future, since this mixed media paper seems to actually hold up really well to larger brushes and more watery mixes. I'm actually really positively surprised by the sketchbook paper overall. I'd kind of gotten this Strathmore sketchbook thinking I'd mostly use it for colored pencils and very dry gouache layers, but it really handles paint extremely well, and I've ended up using more gouache in it than anything else. The peony pink came in surprisingly handy as a contrast to all the green undertones, and for the bright pink flowers to the front of the stairs. The patina green and hummingbird blue mix these gorgeous cool turquoise shades that I used to bring vibrancy to my temple scene. Good morning. I have like 3 more days before I want to send the art scene to the printer, just to be completely sure it gets completed on time. I probably could go a bit later, but I'd rather have them early, and also to give me more room to fold all the scenes for that stationery art fair. I'm a bit torn on what to do with this one because I absolutely love the colors as they are and the kind of rough textures. But at the same time, there's always a part of me that wants to see if I can push it even a bit further. So I think my challenge to myself will be to keep the rough parts rough, but maybe sharpen some of the focus points in the foreground with those candles. I'm not yet sure, because what I've decided to do is draw maybe a tiny warm-up scene here, a view of the temple at the foot of Sanbangsan, and then maybe even do the underpainting or like first color layer for these lanterns here. These two statues of the zodiac animals, I don't think I'll include them in the art scene, but just pick these two in particular from among the statues because, well, my husband was born in the year of the rabbit and I was born in the year of the snake. So they're a bit more self-indulgent and maybe not a good fit for the art scene, especially since they're kind of just white statues. I'm not sure how well that fits in with the rest of these deeper, colorful scenes. And I even made some color swatches of these three paints that I'd mixed into a lot of the background to deepen the shadows. And I think they look quite nice there. Being able to think in compositions, to force myself to think in compositions, is kind of a side effect of this larger sketchbook format. So yeah, tiny warm-up study here, maybe some base colors here, and I'll keep it with the winter palette. Both for the challenge and for how surprisingly well this kind of worked out. At the foot of Sanbangsan, there's the Temple Bomunsa, a quite sprawling collection of buildings, statues in a variety of styles, and all of it nestled into the cliffs, with stairs leading from one hall to the next and then finally up to the Sanbangulsa. I really liked this view here with Sanbangsan in the background, two different building styles for the roofs, some trees as a background, and all these dark shades to frame the light grey statue. A perfect scene to use as a color study for my larger sketch. I quickly blocked in some base colors, focusing a lot on the russet green and patina as well as dark brown. As I'm working with a dry gouache palette, the only fresh paint I'm using is an additional permanent white, and I keep my shadow layers transparent, then building on top of them with more and more opaque paint. It's a very meditative process, which I feel suits the location of my sketches here. Something that I noticed while starting my Sanbangulsa sketch with the Buddha statue is that gouache paint is amazing for expressing matte, rough, non-specular materials. It automatically dries to this slightly chalky finish, and each shade or tint we create also dries into a less intense version of itself. Light tints drying darker, darker shades drying lighter, until we get an overall less contrasted, very mid-tone heavy result. Especially when compared to a medium like acrylics, where black paint dries intensely black and shiny, for example, and it's also much easier to paint glossy, reflective, brightly lit materials, gouache stands out as this very soft alternative. So in a way, my gouache paint here is perfect for these days of summer fog, of ambient light hitting smooth stone and foliage that barely moves, giving everything a slightly muffled, quiet feel. By now you can probably tell that I really enjoy painting these heavier layers towards the end, as I'm working mostly from dark and transparent to light and opaque. These are usual final details, adding some texture and structure. And while I try to avoid pure white paint, sometimes it comes in really handy as a stylistic choice. So this escalated quickly. I wanted to do a really simple temple scene, but somehow this is more detailed than the entirety of the larger scene. Personally, I've always loved painting on small formats. It's why so many of my watercolor sketchbooks or even drawing sketchbooks in the past were A6 in size, even smaller at some point. So this is kind of my comfort zone, but I feel like I've learned a lot from going bigger and blocking in shapes a bit more generously. So I feel like I have a better grasp on brushwork and color mixing overall. I'm doing these because I want to make a little art scene to be inspired by these sceneries of Jeju that even though I live here, I don't actually get to see that often when I'm not actively making an effort to go and play tourist. But underneath all that, there's really a lot that I'm learning here about brushwork, like these final kind of heavier paint details on the foreground statue to make it pop and like stand out of the composition. A lot of this is also about that fog that comes up from the ocean that I'd mentioned in like previous sketching sessions. All of June was really marked by that. For me, it was incredibly visually striking. Instead of just going gray, gray, gray with everything, it's all about this playing with complementary colors and different levels of contrast. So in the background, I tried to capture this cloud of fog enveloping Sanbangsan, and I ended up connecting it quite naturally just because of the temple colors and these flower colors matching as well. Like I said, this escalated a bit from wanting to just do a quick warm-up sketch, but I'll see if I can at least lay down the rough colors for those lanterns on the right side of the page. I've cleaned my palette, made myself an iced coffee because despite there being a thunderstorm outside, it's still 29 degrees indoors, I mean. I haven't turned on the air conditioning because it's still early in the morning. I even cleaned my palette because here I will need red, orange, yellow, pink hues, kind of bright and vibrant. And there's no yellow in this palette, so that will be interesting. Will I get by with just the browns and creating something yellowish, maybe with some gold accents? I guess we'll find out. This sketch of lanterns might actually be the perfect example of how I nowadays approach gouache painting. All of these transparent layers to start out, trying to tone the page without using too much water, since I usually sketch on unstretched paper in a sketchbook. And I try to find different undertones to these shadows. Here I go from violets to greens to warm browns, which honestly this palette is just perfect for. Then switching to a smaller but still flat brush, I get to explore these lanterns. Such a difference from my previous sketches of smoothly sculpted stone, natural rock cliffs, melting wax and flickering light. Here we've got geometric shapes and a smooth, papery textile surface, so I'm going with very flat color washes, trying to find those plane changes within each lantern. While the lanterns weren't lit, I still wanted to give them a hint of a glow, so the shadows behind them had to be dark as a contrast. You might spot me really leaning into those complementary colors as I go along. And again, somehow the winter palette turned out to be the perfect selection for these. Except for one big missing color family. Yellow, which we'll now have to tackle. Okay, so my sketching time is nearly up for today. I have like 10 more minutes before I need to clean up this table and start working on something else. But I just kind of had my personal little breakthrough for mixing a yellow shade with this palette. At first I tried a variety of mixing of different browns. Kind of to get the shadow colors, I'll just keep those to provide contrast. But then I discovered that mixing the russet green and the iron red oxide actually creates this kind of dirty greenish yellow, which is really fascinating. So I brought out my color swatches just now to kind of look up what's going on here. The russet green is a mix between yellow pigment 17, which is diarylite yellow, a pigment I'm actually not familiar with. The iron oxide red is just PR 101, which is a synthetic iron oxide red, and the same pigment as in the russet brown, like how burnt sienna and raw sienna are the same pigment. Russet green with that yellow I can't pronounce, diarylite yellow, green 8, nitroso green, which you can kind of find in like sap green mixes or often also in Hooker's green. And then there's the alizarin crimson in there, the genuine alizarin crimson, the same one we have on the palette already. And I think the complementary color here from this reddish orange kind of neutralizes the nitroso green, and leaves us with some of that yellow pigment mostly shining through and to get us to this kind of greenish yellow ochre. I was this close to caving and using one of the yellow ochres or yellows on this palette, the spring palette, but now I'm so glad I stuck with it, because this is something I maybe wouldn't have figured out ever if I hadn't kind of just pushed through and tried to find a color mix that just by contrasting it with its surroundings can look a little bit yellow. This is still just kind of the underpainting. There's still a lot of layering to come, but I'm glad that I have some kind of direction to go in. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting pigments in these that I'll have to learn more about. You can see here in my pigment list that I wrote just for myself, the front column were the pigments I looked up and was just like, oh yeah, I know these, I use these. And then I had some new additions that are all from these Holbein gouache colors. There are a lot of yellows in there that I'd never even heard of, like the one we just mentioned here, or ingolti yellow. I can't read my handwriting, that's a downside here. The nitroso green that I marked down here is also present in a lot of these colors by Holbein. So it's just interesting. I'm wondering if it's maybe a pigment that's just used more often generally in Japanese art supplies. I'll have to look more into that. So yeah, still quite far to go on my lanterns here. I have some more free time tomorrow morning, so I'll try to get up extra early so I can really push myself and draw the final details over here as well. And then scan everything and write a whole bunch of stuff and lay out everything and clean up the scans and stuff like that that still needs to be done, all before then sending it off to the printer. I started with some color swatches of both purple and yellow color mixes, since that was kind of my revelation yesterday when I wrapped up painting. So we have this kind of greenish, dirty yellow ochre shade, and then I mixed the dark brown and russet green for a darker version of that. Definitely more of a brown than a yellow, but both the dark brown and russet have yellow pigments in them. Purple is of course a complementary color to yellow, so I hope that by placing these purple shadows you can already see here in the surroundings of the yellowish lanterns that I kind of make the yellow look more yellow than it actually is. And while it's still unfinished, you can see that I then try to transition from purple, violet shadows next to the yellow lantern to this more greenish shadow next to the pink one. I'll make some coffee in just a bit, but first I want to just start painting. I now have coffee. Things I have to do before I send the scene to the printer tomorrow. So I want to draw a tiny gouache case, kind of version of this with color swatches to put on the back of the art scene. I want to doodle these two brushes that I've been using the most. Include some more swatches, like these paint swatches, and maybe some of the Derwent drawing that I've been using here and there. I'm thinking about making a mini map of Jeju, just a gouache blob map, and then dots for the locations I visited for these sketches. What does this say? Additional mock-up for final scribble. I have that rough scene mock-up, but I do want to make a final version so I know exactly which text and which illustration to place where. Since I'll mostly be selling this art scene at Korean stationery and book fairs and art markets, I of course wanted to be bilingual, so I can speak Korean, but I do definitely want to double check for typos, have maybe my partner proofread. I want to handwrite the title of the scene, both the Korean and then the kind of English subtitle. So yeah, I often make little to-do lists like this on top of my actual planner, where I write out everything in more detail and keep track of deadlines, important dates. But it helps to have something very concrete that I can look at while painting. I have ADHD, so your mileage may vary. So we'll see how far I get today. Very quickly sketched in those two zodiac sign statues with just a background of green. As I know they won't be included in the art scene, I'm not too stressed about finishing them in time for my printing deadline, but I did want to extend my green paint mixes down so that everything kind of matches. I especially need to-do lists if I'm painting early in the morning before I even had breakfast. Do you also need a while in the morning for your art brain to be fully functional? I've really been trying to squeeze in as much painting time as I can, so writing down my tasks for the next morning, the day before, really helps me kind of starting with something simple, maybe a small change I wanted to implement, maybe just some shadows that need darkening. Something I don't have to think too hard about until I'm properly awake. And then I slowly transition to more challenging tasks later in the day. now that I have this kind of yellow color mix, I'm going in also adding shadows in this kind of complementary pale violet shade. Just experimenting more and more. I'm also trying to create blurred edges that don't rely on blurry brushwork. So instead of just blurring this shadow part into the background, I'm instead transitioning my edges using a desaturated or slightly darker version of the color next to it. Not sure if that actually is worth the time when it comes to the visual result I'm getting. This is very much an approach to edges that I use in acrylics a lot, because there you can't blend, but I like that we get kind of visible brushwork around edges. This lantern still stands out a lot. I'm overall trying to have these lanterns painted in the same style as the background. Just because they are geometric shapes, I don't want them to just be flat color painted on top of the much more expressive tree and rock in the background. The main focus is kind of up here, so I'll have to blur the ones down here out a bit more. And then it will be time for final highlights and gold. And then I need a snack and break, and then I'll finish details on the opposite page, and then I'll do all the little bonus illustrations and the mock-up. And then I'll be done. Because this is taking longer than I expected, and because I'm enjoying the process so much, I imagine I'll probably send this to the printer on Friday instead of first day. As long as it's out by midday, I can usually get the kind of quality pass. They reach out to you if there's anything wrong with any of the guidelines or color profiles. So as long as I get that processed before the weekend, I'm pretty sure it will then arrive midweek. And since the stationery fair is over the weekend, I do then still need to fold all the zines and package some stuff. So yeah, it's still working out. I went in with a lot of time to spare. If you have really saturated objects like these colorful lanterns in a natural environment, the light hitting them from here would bounce off and reflect in other areas. So light hitting this red lantern dispersing in these directions. So you'd probably get some reddish light from in here in the shadow area of the one above. Maybe even some over here, because the light is coming from the front and it was pretty diffuse light thanks to the fog around us. It's not really an extreme effect, but I still want to hint a little bit at it so that you might spot me adding color to my lantern, but then also the same paints kind of mixed in their surroundings. So this has turned into color mixing and lighting experiment study. I definitely need to practice these kinds of basics more. The light might also reflect on the tree in the background, but I don't want to overdo it there, as I kind of need the background complementary colors. This really feels like a color study the longer I go on. All about bounce light, ambient light, local colors, and how they affect their environment. And then of course color mixing itself with a very limited palette. I actually really enjoy technical studies, but of course enjoy them even more when they are somehow connected to a personal project, instead of just a random tutorial I find online. So I got carried away adding more and more detail and layers here. I'm pushing the colors in the shadows to make them more vibrant, less grey, and to make the lanterns pop more. This is what I like so much about the winter palette of the Irodori gouache. The inclusion of some very intense, vibrant colors like the patina or hummingbird blue that make the color mixes far from dull. Since the actual lanterns in real life all had subtly different shades of yellow, even if they were yellow lanterns, I try to keep some variety going here as well. Alright, I had to run some quick errands, which at least gave me some distance. I can now look at this and say that I should probably wrap it up. I'll add final highlights and the gold. I'm very careful with my gold paint embellishments. The gold isn't a replacement for yellow here. That I'm leaving to that russet green and red iron oxide mix, but it represents actual gold detailing on the lanterns that catches the light. So when I finally bring out the antique gold paint from the Irodori set, I'm careful to not just paint everything gold, just the parts of the foil or textile that catches the light. Since I'm basing all of this on kinda shaky footage that I shot from far away, it's also a great exercise in balancing reference and imagination. So I really wanted to make sure that the sketch itself is solid, that all the colors and brushwork look nice, even before I bring in the gold paint. The antique gold is a breathtakingly beautiful paint, and I actually heard that fresh out of the tube it's even more amazing. Here I'm just reactivating the dried color sample that I have, and even that is so vibrant and brilliant and also very opaque. So I think it really suits these lantern detailings. Strong enough to really stand out and catch the light, but without overwhelming the image. Since I got really caught up in those very painterly, brushy details, I wanted to bring the same level of energy to the other sketchbook page as well. I'm glad I let that one rest for a bit to now return after learning new ways of using these paints. I think I am slowly getting a bit more confident in painting overall. And so I brought in deeper, more intense colors for the shadows, creating that yellowish mix for my candles and the smaller statues, and really leaning into the brushwork for the larger statue and all the individual candles. I don't want to make the statue look too sharp because I'm seeing this scene from far away in real life, right? So I want to keep a soft, kind of blurry quality alive. Gouache really is the perfect medium for matte surfaces. I barely had to work for the colors to turn out right. The Rikyū Gray did a lot of heavy lifting as well. Gouache is perfect when just suggesting details. I don't really enjoy it so much when drawing fully rendered, very detailed or sharp, finished illustrations. I find it very hard to find a balance there. But for this more sketchy, kind of unfinished approach, I really enjoy it as a medium. The title I landed on is Jeju Wanderings, or Jeju Osorong, for a meandering, more random feel than a more specific, famous spots on Jeju I traveled to kind of art book would need. Many of these locations aren't all that representative of the island. There's no halasan, no white sand beaches, no black sand beaches, no mandarin trees or oxe grass. So I wanted to make clear from the title that these are impressions of Jeju and not some kind of comprehensive travel art book. Maybe if I sketch a whole lot more, I can make something like that in the future. Now you can see why I usually stop painting at about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. The sun often hits this table that I use for filming, so not much to be done about it, but I'm glad I got to establish all the colors first, because this can really throw off my perception of values. So yeah, I think I'm actually done. I'm incredibly happy with some of these final heavier paint touches for the candles. Decided to make these much brighter because daylight actually could hit them directly, while the ones on the platform are further back in shadows. These final gouache touches are always really fun to do, and I added some more vibrancy to the shadows behind the sculpture with that touch of blue. And for glowing effects, I really like the red iron oxide as a transparent layer, and then building up these yellowish and pale shades on top, so it kind of still has that orange glow underneath. Yeah, pretty impossible to film right now, so I'll probably check in tomorrow morning and head off to scan these now. So I just found my kinda useless mock-up in that it's so scribbly I can barely judge what I'm doing. Let's make a new one. If you're making your own art scene, and especially if you don't have time for test prints, then a mock-up is an absolute must. I had my previous art scene of Switzerland sketches as a reference as well, so I knew how my usual printer would handle a 2-page PDF, but it's important to check your own printer's exact guidelines, especially when it comes to bleed and other limitations to where you can place text. I went very safe despite what this mockup here suggests, keeping my subtitles or my list of location names to single pages instead of spreading them around. The very first scene you make is the hardest. After that, you can always look at your own previous print files and printed versions to create new ones. There will be a digital download version for this art scene as a small ebook. The Derwent drawing pencils are wonderful for these bonus illustrations here and for writing the title text. They create very nicely textured marks that scan and print beautifully. I loved making this, maybe even more than the previous travel sketch scene, as this time I went it with a plan of making a cohesive little book out of my sketches from just that small period of time, from the very start. So everything flowed together really nicely, and I actually feel like I learned a lot about painting from observation, about color mixing and brushwork, giving each location its own charm. I'm also really happy with the bonus illustrations, little color swatches in palette shapes, the minimap of Jeju, and how everything is arranged on the back of the zine. Like a secret to discover if you unfold the pages. Like last time, I made two sizes. A larger one printed on A3 sheets of paper, which I mostly sold at that stationery fair and now at art markets here on Jeju. And then the smaller A4 sheets folded into mini zines, which are the Patreon reward for October. You can still sign up when this video goes online if you'd like to get one shipped to you via snail mail, as the end of the month falls on a weekend this time and I'm not shipping them precisely on the very first day of the next month. Mini zines are probably my favorite print rewards to ship, as I just find them very charming to make and look at. By now I must have folded over 100 of these, so I think I can give a bit of advice. My zines are printed on 130 gram rendezvous natural paper, which gives them a nice stability and tension without making them too hard to fold. You'll need some kind of folding tool. I prefer wooden ones with a very soft curved edge. The one I'm using here is actually from the pottery supply section of my local art shop, but it's been perfect for all kinds of paper folding. I always put more pressure on the back page of the zine and keep my touch very light when I then reinforce the fold for the front side, to make sure there is no scraping on the actual illustrations. Generally, use less force than you think you need when folding. I'd rather redo the same fold 2 or 3 times than use too much pressure and create scratches. I have metal rulers in 2 sizes at hand, and I then use my wooden tool again to make sure the folded zine pages, and especially the book spine, feel pleasant and crisp. Thank you so much for coming with me on this journey of making tiny art zines, of learning about gouache painting, of filling this travel impressions sketchbook. And I hope you enjoyed the look at some Korean temples as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in my next art video.